The first epistle of Clement to the Corinthians is actually the oldest surviving Christian homily outside of the New Testament. According to Andrew Luth, the epistle is generally dated to 96 CE. However, it's not cited until roughly 135 CE by Polycarp in his epistle to the Philippians, and later in antiquity by Denis, the bishop of Corinth, around 170 CE, and Clement of Alexandria sometime in the last 20 years of the 2nd century. As Andrew Luth points out in his book titled Early Christian Writings, on page 19, our knowledge of it is dependent on comparatively few manuscripts. As to who the Clement is that wrote this epistle, his identity will most likely never be known. From Origen onwards, he was identified with the Clement mentioned in Philippians 4:3. But as Andrew Luth points out, although it's easy to see how this connection has been made, there is no evidence to support it. Andrew further points out that Clement may have been a freedman or the son of a freedman of Flavius Clement's household, but even this is speculation. Just as with the Gospels and many early Christian writings, the authors of early works remain unknown and makes it difficult to date specifically when these works may have been written. Clement himself is very knowledgeable about Christian doctrine. In fact, he recites New Testament scriptures frequently and hopes to lead the people of Corinth away from their non-Christian behaviors by using them. Clement further comes across as a student of Stoic philosophy, especially in chapter 20, when he talks about the harmony of nature. As Andrew Luth points out on page 21, order in nature is submission and obedience to the command of God. Many scholars reference this epistle to validate a historical Jesus of the Gospels, but the epistle itself comes across as a plea, if not a diatribe, for Christians of Corinth to get back to the ways of Christ and to stop disputes amongst themselves within their community. In the first chapter of Clement's epistle, he states, "We refer to the odious and unholy breach of unity among you, which is quite incompatible with God's chosen people, in which a few hot-headed and unruly individuals have inflamed to such a pitch that your venerable and illustrious name, so richly deserving of everyone's affection, has been brought into serious disrepute." Clement continues in chapter 3, stating, "And now all righteousness and peace among you is at an end, and all have fallen back into the horrid sin of envy, the sin that brought death into the world." But just as pleas and biblical references are abound, there is also the epistle's fair share of dogmatic ideas and reasoning. One example would be found in chapter 21, where Clement states, "Let us set our womenfolk on the road to goodness by teaching them to be examples of lovable purity, to display real sincerity in their submissiveness, to prove the self-restraint of their tongues by observing silence, and to bestow equal affection with no favoritism, and as becomes holiness upon all God-fearing persons." Reading this passage nearly 2,000 years later, I would sincerely doubt any God would want this for any sex of his own supposed creation. Clement then relies on what he believes is proof of Jesus' resurrection. He tells us, "Think, my dear friends, how the Lord offers us proof after proof that there is going to be a resurrection, of which he has made Jesus Christ the first fruits by raising him from the dead. My friends, look how regularly there are processes of resurrection going on at this moment. The day and night show us an example of it, for night sinks to rest, and day arises. Day passes away, and night comes again. Or take the fruits of the earth. How, and in what way, does a crop come into being? When the sower goes out and drops each seed into the ground, it falls to the earth shriveled and bare, and decays. But presently the power of the Lord's providence raises it from decay, and from that single grain a host of others spring up and yield their fruit." To further this false reasoning, Clement, in chapter 25, elaborates on the flight of the phoenix, which amounts to little more than myth and urban legend. The story, borrowed from the Egyptians, tells of a large bird, which every 500th year returns to its nest with the bones of its predecessors in front of everyone to see. Relying on this story, Clement, in chapter 26, writes, "When the Creator of all things has even made us a bird to disclose the magnitude of his promises to us, need we find it such a great wonder that he has a resurrection in store for those who have served him in holiness and in the confidence of a sound faith?" But aside from the utter lack of any first-hand accounts outside the Bible, or any first-hand evidence from himself, Clement, on numerous points, fails to provide anything regarding Christ's life and resurrection outside of the gospel accounts, which, like the story of the phoenix, amounts to little more than myth and urban legend. We come no closer to knowing who Jesus was through Clement's epistle, other than what the four Gospels tell us. There is nothing new, astounding, or provocative within this epistle, bringing us closer to a historical Jesus of Nazareth. The biggest surprise from this epistle comes from what we today can perceive as contradictions amongst the early Christian sect, and more importantly, the Christian doctrine. This epistle brings to light the fact that early Christians were still confused on their New Testament doctrine, and they themselves thought that they were just another sect of Judaism. For example, in chapter 36, Clement writes, "Even Jesus Christ, the high priest, by whom our gifts are offered, and the protector by whom our feebleness is aided." Yet, Clement fails to see the fact that Jesus himself, according to the Gospels, wasn't even a Pharisee. The confusion continues, unfortunately, in chapter 40. Clement, covering the topic of the church's liturgy and hierarchy, goes on to write, "Consequently, they who present their offerings at such appointed times are accepted and blessed, since the care with which they observe the master's laws clears them of all offense. The high priest, for example, has his own proper services assigned to him. The priesthood has its own station. There are particular ministries laid down for the Levites, and the layman is bound by regulations affecting the laity." Clement continues, "The continual daily sacrifices, peace offerings, sin offerings, and trespass offerings are by no means offered in every place, brothers, but at the altar in front of the temple, and then only after a careful scrutiny by the offering of the high priest and the other ministries aforesaid. Anything done otherwise than in conformity with God's will is punishable with death." These few passages present major implications on early Christians and how they viewed themselves, but more importantly, that the first Christians continued to follow and abide by Jewish laws and customs found in the Old Testament. Only later, at the Council of Nicaea onwards, would Christianity transform its doctrine once again when it became the official state religion of the Roman Empire. Almost 2,000 years later, Christianity has branched off into thousands of denominations and continue to this day arguing over the proper way to interpret the Bible. Perhaps Clement's epistle should be relied upon for understanding this interpretation.